Hey yo, good morning to my artistic community. How you doing? I am going to talk about kind of the state of the industry a little bit. And it's gonna get a little bit kind of deep in it. So I'm gonna try to do my best to keep this short and sweet and get to what I believe is the heart of some of these issues. Oh shoot, let me start over. I keep drawing like this very specific shape all the time whenever I do stuff. Yeah, I'm going to try to keep it pretty close to the chest. So one of the things that I think has happened in the last few years is a misinterpretation of our industry as like a collapsing or failing industry. I've been doing this for quite a while, and I have seen these things come and go. I have seen um, our industry do really great. I have seen our industry do all right, and other times do pretty poorly. And if you just look historically, this has been true. Like I think there were different eras of games where I think like in the 80s or 90s there was like this huge drop, but then there was the renaissance of like home console and home gaming and so forth and so on. And I think we're just doing that again. And I have a couple predictions of what I think is happening, and I think what the market is actually probably looking for moving forward. But anyway, a couple things. The first thing that I think needs to be recognized is that the industry is going through it. I have seen a lot of close friends and colleagues go through lots of challenges. There's lots of shutdowns and downsizing. This is a persistent and a consistent issue. And I want to kind of walk through why this can happen and that it's not always like as simple as bad studio, bad execs, you know? I think as soon as we all can kind of come to terms that there is more to it than that, the better chances we have to kind of circumvent and overcome these challenges. I think if we paint a picture of bad executives, then it really kind of moves the dial and moves kind of the issue to something that I don't think is at at all as accurate as it seems. Like when I'm inside studio environments, I have a different perspective on this because I've seen how it's not specifically this case. I've worked for really good publishers, for instance, who are really hands off, and yet the studio itself had a lot of challenges. And I've seen publishers behind closed doors do everything they can to help the team, but then on the surface, where everyone else can see, like the gamers and news outlets, they blast them. They can't blame the studio. Like it's clearly the executives. It's clearly the larger management class. Now, don't get me wrong. I am also not saying that it is not part of the problem. I am saying it is more complex than simply pointing fingers at any group or any department. But let me talk about like what I think has happened currently, though. So I think why it feels worse now. A couple reasons. I believe that there's a few things happening. One, we went through a pandemic, y'all. Like I think ignoring the fact that there was a global crisis, and not only that was it like an epidemic, but it was like an economic crisis. It wasn't just simply people getting sick and dying. It was also things are closed and governments have shifted and conflicts have begun. Like it's just there's so many more things that went on that were kind of fishy and kind of like not even fishy, just complicated, man. Lots of people passed away. Whether you believe it or not, people did go. And some people that did not pass away, um, that are within our industry, they also are kind of screwed. Like some of them, have like perpetual brain fog. It's pretty wild. I've known some people like this, and some of these people are incredible talents that are now just gone. And so there are a lot of facets to this problem. The game industry also, I think, misread people's loneliness. They are like, people are playing so many video games, like let's invest. And this is not exclusive to video games. There are, for instance, other industries. For instance, the housing industry. A lot of people were moving out of their states to different states. And so these people were financing new homes to be built in the states that were becoming more and more popular. But as things have been kind of bouncing back and kind of regulating to what we were once doing before, because there was a reason why things were built the way they were prior, not as many people are moving anymore. And so now you have all these new buildings and new infrastructure that are empty because people changed their mind. It happens. Pretty normal. And to ignore these facets, I think is deeply problematic because it's not really looking at the leaking faucet right here, right? So let's think about some other things that are going on. I think that there was a huge push for large scale hiring. So I think that there are more people that got hired that probably would have not got hired pre-pandemic. And this is not me saying that many of you who got laid off or people who lost their jobs and people that are feeling really the pain, that you shouldn't have deserved that job. I'm just saying that they might have not even considered it because they would have been more fiscal or more, penny pincher at that time. Whether you deserved it or not, they just would have said, no, we shouldn't hire anybody. Like, point blank, like regardless if they are good for our studio, versus you are not only are you good for your studio, we got all this money, let's do it, let's just bring you on board, not knowing that 2 or 3 years later that surplus would drop dramatically, and then all of a sudden they have you salaried, they have you working on these projects, and the money is not coming in to pay you anymore, right? And this is just a common problem, even at a personal level. I think people just do this shit all the time. It's called lifestyle inflation. I am not innocent of this as well. I make this mistake as well. And so if you start to consider all of these things, you can see that there is going to be a bit of a renaissance again. There's going to be a bit of a shift back to positive revenue and positive state of affair, and I predict sometime in 2026, because you can only go for so long where people aren't making money, like these large studios, that they realize they have to make better investments and better management choices. But also I make the prediction a lot more people are going to just make their own shit, and a year or two of doing your own stuff, like if somebody's listening to this and start making their own things, like their own animated show or own video game, and they put it out there and it does really well and they become their own little small studio, and enough people do that, then you start having a lot of little studios that can hire a lot of us, and 2 years from now is a long time to do that, so by sometime in 2026. So and for what it's worth, I'm trying to do that for myself. Like, I am building my own little game studio, and I have no ambitions that any individual game that I make will just be a hit. It will take some time. I am almost certain of this. Anyway, let's get back to kind of some of the points here. So like I talked about kind of like the economic global crisis. I talked about people being hired when they might have not been hired in a previous iteration of where we were as a species. Another thing to consider is, again, like the loneliness aspect. Like, people were feeling lonely, so they were over consuming digital media, and including video games and movies, obviously. But like, part of that also made games like Among Us, that was out for like 2 years, I think, prior to the pandemic. and it did okay. It didn't do great. It didn't do epic. It was just good, but it just wasn't. People didn't care. And then when people were looking for something to do, like find something to create some semblance of social interaction, Among Us was that game, and it did incredible, and it did really well. And so I think a bit of the market has an effect on what's doing well and what's not doing well. And I do believe more social and more, you know, multiplayer and more like games to get people to talk to each other are going to just do well. I mean, they've always done well, but I believe it's just going to consistently do well, right? If you look at Helldivers, did great. If you look at what you call it, Power World, did pretty good. I already mentioned what you call it, Among Us, but then your classics like Modern Warfare did really well. I think the Monster Hunter game is not doing as well as it ought to, but I think that's only because of how much money it originally cost to make. I have no idea. I haven't looked into it any further. But then there's also like games that don't require you to think too much. Like you could just get in and out. Like it's just a fucking fun little video game. And so things like Balatro and like the Warhammer game that just came out that reminds people of like old classic arcade gaming or just classic console gaming. You just get in and you just get out. Like you don't have to overthink it. It's a bit of a ride, And I think those types of games are just going to do well for the foreseeable future. Perhaps that will change. And again, these are just my predictions and my opinion. I don't know if you should even consider this a law of the land. You could just parse what makes sense to you for your own good. But at the end of the day, what I'm trying to say is that all of this stuff is affecting what's happening right now. And to kind of get to the more nuanced level of like what it's like to work inside of a studio, in fact, maybe I'll go more into details of like the best ways to work within a studio and my experiences at least. But this idea that like these larger corporations and executives are a huge factor for these failings and these bad management. It can be. It could be a little bit of both. I've seen studios that were offered close to like $10 million from like a large Chinese investor, and then 3 years in have almost nothing to show for it. Now, is that the investor's fault or is that the studio's fault? Right? I've seen studios who used every penny that they had as well as they could. They had to do some delays and extensions just for the sake of making the video game. I mean, this is pretty common. Delays and extensions are almost standard for any video game project. But again, let's say the investment was good and all this stuff. But then, the execs butt in. They're like, hey, you got to add this. You got to add this feature. You got to add that feature. And so then the game starts to, and this is, I think, was one of the most common things you might hear about. And it is true. These things do happen. And the studio is like kind of hamstrung because they're just like, well, we got to like make sure our publisher is happy so that investment keeps getting funneled through. But at the same time, like some of these decisions are going to maybe make our game worse, And I've seen situations where it's a little bit of both, where it's not even on the publisher side or on the employee, like the team side. It's like everybody's making these bad calls. You have people who are like on the director level, maybe making good calls, but then the team feels strongly against it, and they might just not have the right perspective, or maybe they're approaching arguments and discussion poorly. And so as some directors try to be more agreeable, they try to appease and have a better work culture. And as an unfortunate consequence, the game may suffer. And I say it's unfortunate because you don't want to have a bad work environment. You want to have leaders that listen to you, right? If you're employed by them. But what if you're wrong? What if you don't know about your opinion being good, and yet you think it is, and you're arguing so uh, effectively that you've kind of there's this term in like board game. There's like in board games where you're like you have like a co-op game. I think it's called like captaining or being captain. It's where there's a lot of collaboration needed, but there's like one or two people who can just talk over everyone else. And they're really charismatic and they're really good at speaking. And so what ends up happening is they're becoming the ones that are just, we're just doing what they're saying. And you will be shocked that think that this is not exclusive to board gaming, but like there are people that might be in more lower rung employment, or like on like for lack of a better term, like on lower part of the ladder, but yet they're so good at speaking and pointing out their ideas that they overshadow maybe some critiques or criticism that might be, or worse, people might have these critiques but they don't say anything because they're like, yeah, I think this is right, because they're all afraid of being wrong. They don't know what's the right answer. They don't know if this is a good idea, because making video games is fucking hard. And the reverse is true, and probably more likely to be true, where you would have like your directors act like they know everything. And when you try to push back, they're like, you don't know what you're talking about. And they might leverage status, which is also an unfortunate consequence. So I've seen all of this, and I've seen combinations of this, and I've seen producers from the publishing company hamstring a project. I've also seen producers from a publishing and investor side be like, nah, this is great. You guys are doing great. You guys need more money? Like, I've seen it all. And yet I also see consistently that games are hard to make and tend to fail more often than they succeed. So this tells me it is more than just greed. That is definitely a big part of it, but it's more than that. And I think a lot of gamers, and I think even game devs who work at these studios, don't know what else to do, right? And other than to like, point some fingers. But I have found a lot of success working wherever I've worked, doing a couple simple things. One, acknowledging I don't know what the fuck to do. I don't know if these ideas are good. I don't know if what we should do is going to be a fun game. I don't know. It sounds fun on paper, but we'll find out once we start to play it, right? I don't know if audiences are going to want to play this game. I don't know. So that is my general paradigm coming into a company, is actually being humble enough to recognize that making a video game is like trying to wrangle an oiled up bull while your hands are tied behind your back. And even if you've done it, you've wrangled the bull before and you straddled it and you've tied it down, doesn't mean that you can do it again with the same success. It is an incredibly challenging ordeal. So acknowledging that challenge, like genuinely saying, we do not know, is a huge advantage as a leader or as a manager, because then you set the stage to be able to make a mistake in a call and allow some grace from your team to like be like, okay, well, let's think about this again. Because at some point, some people do need to make calls. And if you are the one that's like, hey, listen, like, we might make mistakes here, right? That allows grace from the leadership side. But then if you apply that on the staff side, like if your staff makes mistakes and you're like, hey, man, it happens, then it adds double grace for every department involved. And what you should do as your main strategy to making a video game is build an environment of rapid prototyping, playtesting, Q&A as often and as aggressively as humanly possible. I had my buddy tell me one thing once, my partner who's helping me make this video game. He said, I feel like the playtests are our actual boss. We're not the boss of our game. Our playtests are. And I love that because what it implies is that we might have all these great ideas, but as soon as we start to fly around and move around in our video game, we will immediately change our mind based off of the consequences of what we've experienced. When we watch other people play our game, we're like, oh, shoot, that's solid, And I believe that a lot of working environments just aren't built for this. They are like, look, we got this much time, this many years. We got to use this kind of GDD, this plan of action. And for what it's worth, I have yet to see in my entire career a GDD made from zero to hero. It stayed almost identical to what it was to the very end. I've worked with some of the greatest game designers, and they agree this is an outrageous thing to try to pull off. It would be like a scientist trying to build rocket fuel without ever building any simulations or any kind of test. They're just the map checked out, and then they put people on a rocket and send them out, and then the rocket blows up. It's no, even the smartest among us understand and respect that there needs to be some testing at a frequent level. In fact, they do it, at least the best of them do it very often and very aggressively. And so a lot of work environments, due to all the circumstances I outlined earlier, kind of don't allow for this to happen. And wherever I go, I almost demand that we do this. We have to. And well, you're the art director, so what does that have to do with game design? It's well, if I know what kind of game we're making, we all agree it's fun, and we all know what's fun about it, then I know what to art direct. I know what to compound, to accelerate, to amplify, to exaggerate, to make the game feel even that much more fun. And so that's the first part of it, which is or the second part. The first part is recognizing I don't know what the fuck. Second part is playtesting aggressively. And then another part, a third part, is to ultimately have empathy of the process in general and all the people that you work with, and understanding people's abilities and their lack of abilities. If you understand what your team can actually do, then you can actually make the game, regardless of what the playtests say. It will allow you to know well, we can't do this because we don't have that skill set. So let's create self-imposed limitations for the sake of the greater good, and not to increase the scope unnecessarily because the game isn't as fun as we thought, right? And all I've ever done is remind great artists and great talents that they're great. And with these kind of factors, one, understanding that making video games is fucking nobody knows how to do it. Two, building a work environment where playtesting, prototyping, iterating is the standard. And three, recognizing that at the end of the day, the team can only do what they can do, and I will amplify their skills with what they are capable of doing to only make them feel more confident, more competent, and more excited about coming to work every day, But this is what I found helps studios and projects kind of accomplish their goals. And even though with the success of approach, and we've shipped games with this kind of approach, at the end of the day, the markets will dictate certain things. The global crises can affect people's spending power. There's still just so many things that are going against what's happening, and paying attention to these things, I think, helps try to alleviate some of the problems that you might run into. But I do believe that there is a bit of a renaissance going to probably occur in the next few years, where more and more smaller studios are just going to spawn. More and more ragtag group of assassin developers are going to make some of the greatest, most innovative projects that we've ever seen, and that audiences cannot take their hands off of. There was a movie called Flows about a little cat in some sort of weird watery apocalypse. That's all the movie is, all animated in Blender with a small team. Now, I don't mean like a small team, like 2 people, but it was like smaller than your normal animation studio. And it won an award and it did great in theaters. This is what I'm getting at. Like, I think this is what people are going to do. My children love games like Roblox, which is basically educating them that there are just small games to play. And they're happy with that. They're happy playing small little titles. And guess what? That was my childhood. When I grew up, it was all about playing all sorts of little games, not these big lifetime investment games where you just play all the time, these live service games. It was about just jumping in and out. You know, I don't want another job. I just want to get away from it all. And I think smaller studios can do that without having to worry about a live service income because they don't have to employ or salary thousands of people. And so right now it feels dire, but if you look at the numbers, people are still playing the shit out of games. People are still spending so much money. And on movies and TV shows, these are still being heavily consumed because we're still human. And humans love our craft. We love art. We love creativity. And so, again, trying to stay optimistic, but be realistic at the same time. Like, I'm trying to give you guys a bit of a behind the curtain of what I believe are the symptoms of the industry, but also recognize that there is definitely going to be a shift here. And I believe that it's going to be for the greater good. Put the power in the people, you know what I mean? So anyway, hope you guys enjoyed this video. It was a little bit longer than normal, but I feel like it needed to be said. Oh, one other thing. I actually may make a whole nother video about this. Somebody on a Discord group that I just joined was telling me about how their perspective of the term toxic positivity, they had a more pragmatic example of it in kind of like the workplace. And part of what I was mentioning, I was talking about this kind of agreeableness. That to me is a challenge and definitely a problem to be solved. You don't want too many people to be too agreeable because it can prevent conflict that is necessary, you know? And so I don't think anybody misinterpreted my interpretation of just getting good news and positive feedback is not inherently bad. You definitely need a little bit of spice, right? A little bit of salt on that steak for sure. But I think that at the end of the day, it serves no real benefit to be mostly negative versus mostly positive, you know? So anyway, I prefer mostly positive because it promotes action. With that said, though, I'll see you guys later. Have a good one.